Hello! In this presentation, we are going to learn about protection of data stored in biobanks, including that derived from samples. Data protection is not about the restriction of the use of personal data or restriction of data sharing. Rather, it is about responsible use and share, ensuring that we use and share data in a manner that protects the rights of individuals to have information about them to be protected from misuse and to be used for purposes that also have value for them. Regulations for the protection of data have developed the world over to implement the 12th article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Data protection regulations set out the principles and conditions for all sectors of society to process personal data. They delineate the rights of data subjects and the principles and conditions that must be met in the processing of personal data. They are in general strict and, if applied as stated, can limit the use of personal data for health research purposes. Exceptions are therefore required. The exact exceptions vary from country to country, so it is important that biobanks be aware of the specific national data protection requirements that apply. It is important to note that data protection regulations applies only to the processing or use of personal data. Now, let us consider how the data regulations apply in Europe. Not only because the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, as it is called, is very well developed, but also because many countries have adapted the GDPR to their contexts. GDPR applies to the use of information relating both to an identified or identifiable natural person, such as through the name, date of birth, gender, social security number, and to pseudonymize the data, which is coded personal data that has been de-identified, but can be re-identified using the code. The GDPR does not apply to the samples themselves, only the data coming from the samples, nor does it apply to data collected or stored anonymously. GDPR requires the users to follow the principles of data processing, a framework rooted in ethical norms. These principles require that one must not collect any data not allowed by law, only for legitimate purposes, any more data than is required for the purpose, and not store it longer than is required. Data should be stored accurately and collected only using legally mandated procedures such as an informed consent and respecting ethical values such as fairness and transparency and privacy and confidentiality. Ensuring privacy and confidentiality is key to the protection of data and will be discussed in a separate presentation. Under data protection regulations, informed consent is generally defined as being a freely given, specific and ambiguous indication of the data subject's wishes on how their data should be used. Biobanking, as we have seen, involves many uncertainties about the use of collected samples and associated data. How biobanking samples will be used and by whom and for what purpose are generally not known at the time of collecting samples. Broad consent is therefore often used for biobanking purposes. This does not meet the requirements of consent under data protection regulations. In the module on informed consent, we will see how broad consent might be permissible as a legally valid option. The data protection law requires that key individuals that are involved in data collection and processing be identified. These include the data controller, who controls the data and ensures compliance with the law, the data processor, who processes personal data, usually under the direction of the data controller, and the supervisory independent national body to monitor and enforce compliance with the law. Data protection law also sets out the various rights that a data subject has. Many of these rights are usually spelled out in the informed consent. It is the data controller who has responsibility for ensuring that these rights are met. The exact rights do vary according to data protection law, so it is important to check the national legal framework that applies.